What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to give my take on Luke Stevens' video, A Skeptic's Look at Hogwarts Legacy. So this was something that was floating around the internet. A lot of people, I think even like Retro Raconteur, talked about on his live stream. Expecto Go made like a statement on his Discord. So it's gotten people kind of riled up, or at least a good discussion. Now, I want to make a couple things clear before we go into this. This is a respectful take on what he said. I'm not here to destroy his character because I think, honestly, he is a good guy. I respect him. I've heard of him and watched some of his stuff in the past. I know he does like live stream discussions or discussions just with other creators. I think he did one with Mr. Maddie Plays for Starfield. I really liked that, kind of taking two different looks at the same game, but from two different kind of angles. So, and by the way, one final thing, which is kind of funny, I actually have recorded and it's ready to go. I haven't uploaded it, but I actually did one final video on our expectations for this game. And expectations is a lot of what Luke talks about in his videos. So generally, I get what he's going for. So it's a skeptic's look at Hogwarts. He's looking at it from the frame of let's not just, think this game is going to be outrageously good just because, which I think is fine. And again, actually in the video that you haven't seen yet, I talk a lot about I don't think this is going to be the game of the generation, but I do think it's going to be a really amazing game for certain people. We'll see for other people, and I go into it. So it'll be fun kind of do this and then that video after. But here's where I stand. I disagree pretty heavily with how he approached A Skeptic's Look. So throughout the entire video, he's looking at it mainly through negatives, like just trying to point out some potential flaws in the game. Again, not to like get ourselves mindlessly hyped up for it, which I understand, I actually get. The issue is, well, number one, he talks about how there's also all these positives with the game, and the only positive he gives in a 25-minute video is he talks about how accurate it is to lore, that the castle looks accurate to lore. He doesn't talk about combat, he doesn't talk about visuals, well, I guess besides how it, is reflecting the lore. He doesn't talk about any other positive, even though he constantly says there are more positives. He never gives any besides just that the castle looks good. So that's, it's kind of one-sided. And I guess that's the point because it's called A Skeptic's Look at Hogwarts Legacy. Next thing is his skepticism. I don't agree with the skepticism. So I do believe there are reasons to be skeptical of this game. In fact, I've talked about it over 250 videos on this channel. I do think this game is not going to be a perfect game. Like, just to make sure we're all on the same page. I'm not saying that this game is going to be a flawless masterpiece, which I want to talk about kind of how he addressed that as well. But I do think there are going to be potentially some issues. Basically has 3 or 4 main issues with the game. Number one is its publisher, Warner Bros. And he spends a very long time talking about Gotham Knights and talking about how Gotham Knights was kind of a broken mess when it came out. Now, number one, I don't actually think Gotham Knights was a broken mess. Now, it wasn't a great game, but it came out and it worked kind of fine. Like you didn't need patch. It wasn't a cyberpunk situation. Now, was the game kind of empty? Could you argue the live service elements that were stripped away from that game? Yeah, you could. But he didn't really mention that. He just talked about how Gotham Knights didn't come out in the greatest condition, and because of that, you have to be worried for Hogwarts. That's not true at all. I don't agree with that in the slightest. Those are two completely different companies. Now, yes, you could say, well, they all fall under Warner Bros., WB Games, right? So they have kind of like this system in place for all their studios, and that is true. I mean, like what happens in one studio of a certain publisher, you could maybe look for warning signs in another, but you also have to take a few steps back and say, well, let's look at each studio individually. You want to talk about WB Montreal? I kind of know my stuff. I feel with WB Montreal. They haven't made a game in 9 years, right? Their last game was Arkham Origins. The team that's there now, I actually don't even know if there's a single soul at WB Montreal right now that made Arkham Origins. You know who also isn't at WB Montreal? Anybody who works at Avalanche, right? They're different, and their talent levels are different. What they're good at and what they're bad at are different. Now, if you want to talk about live service and the attempt that maybe like Microtransactions, which he goes into, right? That's another element of Luke's video. That's fine, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the idea that because Gotham Knights came out in shaky conditions means Hogwarts would, they're two completely different studios. And that was a huge part of his video, is looking at WB Games, and they published Back for Blood, which wasn't that good, and they published, all this different stuff, and it's like, well, I guess, but like every publisher has some hits and some miss. For every Kingdom Hearts that Square Enix does, they make a Babylon's Fall, or they do something else. Does that mean I have to be worried for Kingdom Hearts 4? I guess maybe according to him, but not me. So, again, I'm not saying you have to discount or you don't even take a look at whatsoever the other teams kind of in their ecosystem, because I do think there's some similarities, and because they share technology and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think because Gotham Knights came out means literally anything. They're two completely different things. So WB Games, Gotham Knights, that was a huge thing that he kind of focused on, and then he focused on microtransactions and kind of like paying for stuff. And this one, I can see a little bit more. I mean, me, even myself, I have talked about that Dark Arts Arena, where I can see people thinking it's a big issue. I personally don't see the Dark Arts Arena as a gigantic thing. I guess some people do think it's which is fine. I mean, if that's what you want to think, that's fine. One thing to keep in mind, though, is they did actually say that there's going to be more arenas in the game. It's just that specific arena that they showed in the gameplay showcase 2, or Roman numeral 2, that's the one that you pay for. Now, is it weird that you made a gameplay showcase and 1/3 of it was showcasing a thing that's locked behind a paywall, which Luke brings up, and I will say that is very fine. Like, I understand that. Whether or not you think the Dark Arts Arena is a big deal, if you want to take a little critical look there and kind of jab a little and say, well, it is a little weird that 1/3 of one of your showcases is just on something that's blocked behind a paywall, that is a little weird. I will say that's definitely a little weird, but I think he's putting a lot more into the Dark Arts Arena than we really need to, and that's his opinion versus my opinion. And number 2, I also believe the idea of microtransactions in general is scaring him when there's no evidence of that in this game. He even brings up Shadow of War, which I'm very familiar with, and I do know the story, but also, again, that's WB Games inserting themselves into the discussion, into Monolith, and demanding that they put microtransactions in Shadow of War. Now, I guess the point is that could happen here, but he never directly kind of says that. The closest he gets is talking about the collector's edition. Again, I'm actually in full agreement with him there that the collector's edition is bad. This is a really, really bad collector's edition. It's cheap. It's not worth $300. At least all these things are, again, my opinion. So I agree there. And you could argue, I suppose, that is an indication that WB Games is kind of inserting themselves and saying, hey, because, to not blame Avalanche doesn't have a say over that anyway. So maybe WB Games goes to them and says, hey, let's rip people off with this collector's edition. And they say, well, I guess we have to, overlords, right? So it could be something like that. You also have, I guess, the Dark Arts Arena. If your goal is to say, it's already a bad sign because, again, they made a whole part of the game and they're putting it aside, that doesn't, bode well for the future. I mean, I suppose, is it a good sign? I guess not, but I think that's just WB Games, firstly, okay? And then also, I don't think there's evidence to show that this is going to be a reoccurring theme with the game. I do think there'll be DLC, but I think it'll be, substantial DLC. I don't think this is going to, again, bring up Shadow of War, the microtransactions in Shadow of War actually hurt the game. Literally, they hurt the game. Whereas microtransactions here, even what we have, right? So if you want to base it off of what we know, nothing hurts the game. Not a single thing. It adds to the game in terms of the Dark Arts Arena, but if you don't have that, you are not in a worse position at all versus somebody who has it. You're on the exact same playing field. Shadow of War is different. Shadow of War, you're not on the same playing field, all right? So you have that. There's no evidence, even if you want to go based off evidence, there's no evidence that that's going to happen in Hogwarts. I guess to keep your mind open to the idea that maybe it could, but that's not the game right now. Also, I would say I just tend to disagree with his take kind of in general because he doesn't really focus on how about the things that I'm not saying oh, I'm perfect, I know all the right, wrong things to criticize the game, but he doesn't even go into the game mechanics or the day-night cycle or how the game doesn't remember your choices or the combat or the exploration. He goes over none of it, and you could find pros and cons in it if you looked at it, but he doesn't look at a single thing. It's literally WB Games and the games they've published. Gotham Knights was bad, so this game is bad too. And then Microtransactions. There's actually one more, and it's the studio itself in Avalanche. Now, this one, again, I feel like he's kind of on it. I don't really have too much negative to say. The main crux of this, and I actually saw somebody comment this on my video, maybe he watched this video, Luke's video, where like the last game they made was Cars 3, right? To pretend like Avalanche has always been this behemoth that maybe some people think it is nuts, right? Because it's not. This is a studio, but here's the thing. This studio was like formed, like they specifically sought out people. They're ready to go for this kind of game. Now, can you make the argument that it still is their first big open world RPG game in Avalanche? Now, maybe a lot of these people have done it before in other places and more like support stuff, but coming all together, working on it for the first time, this is the first time they've done this. Yes, that is true. And that is something to watch. And in fact, I have called that out multiple times with Avalanche, right? Luke brings up Days Gone, which I do think is actually a pretty good example. Although, for them, I mean, they made Uncharted Golden Abyss. They didn't come from absolutely nothing. Like, I would say Uncharted Golden Abyss is a little bit higher up than, like, Cars 3. So, actually, you could argue that that Days Gone and Ben's studio is almost, like, too good, in comparison. But it doesn't really matter. I mean, the point here is I understand it to a degree, but I also think if you don't mention it, you're completely discounting the fact that, but you adapt. Like, you look at Sucker Punch for Sony. They made a multiplayer thing. Like, Infamous 2 had a multiplayer thing, but, like, their games are single player. So what made us think that they could do multiplayer? Well, they hired people for it. And again, I'm not trying to be aggressive. I'm not trying to, do anything stupid here. But the point is, if you're going to pivot 180, I think there is a part of, as a consumer, that should be aware, okay, we should probably watch out for this because this is factually the first time they've done it. I get that. But also, when you kind of skip over and you don't really, like, literally when you watch his video, it sounds like what he's saying is like the team that made Cars 3 were then given the script to make a Hogwarts Legacy game, and they're just going right into it, which is not actually true, right? It's another kind of like Gotham Knights situation where it's like, teams swap. A lot of, and I mentioned WB Montreal, the people that made Origins aren't even there anymore, right? Most of them. So, like, teams move on. Some people swap in, some people swap out. They look for specialities, right? So if it's a multiplayer thing, they will look for people that have done it before. Guerrilla Games is actually doing that right now. They had done multiplayer, then they went to Horizon. They hired a bunch of experts in the open world RPG, arena, and then they're also doing a multiplayer thing, so they hire more multiplayer people. So you just hire, now maybe you get people, maybe you don't, but you specifically look for people that are good at what you're trying to do. And so to not even mention that is kind of weird because it literally does sound like he's saying the Cars 3 team, just every single soul that worked on Cars 3, they were given the script to work on Hogwarts, which I don't believe that to be true. And that was the crux of his argument. So again, like, generally, I am not opposed. This is not like I'm butthurt because of criticism towards Hogwarts. Like, I'm bowing down to them. If you know me, that's the farthest thing from me, right? I'm obviously very interested in this game. I talk about this game a lot, but I have no, they don't owe me anything. I don't owe them anything, right? So I'm going to say what I want to say about this game. I actually do believe to be a little skeptical. I actually have been one of the only actual, like, Hogwarts Legacy people that cover Hogwarts quite often. I've probably been the most critical of them, right? So I'm not over here just saying nonstop positives. I also do throw in some negatives. But at the same time, this was just kind of a weird video to me. I don't really understand. There was 4 main points, and, like, there was some things I agree with in, I guess, all of them, although the WB thing is really odd to me. So none of them are really the skepticisms that I would throw out there in regards to this game. He didn't really even look at the game itself. Oh, and one final thing. He talks a lot about, well, again, setting expectations, but I will say in comment to how he says it, he talks about how, like, creators have a like a duty to make sure, and I do agree with the idea that you should not lose your integrity. You shouldn't just say something to, like, ride the wave. I agree with that. And I don't, so in that way, I don't think he's calling out, honestly, almost any, if any, of the Hogwarts, creators that we all are part of a circle circle of. I don't really think he's doing that. I think if anything, he's probably calling out some of the bigger channels that have just, cover all this different stuff and then ride the wave of Hogwarts and just say it's like the greatest thing of all time. But I also, and this is going to be odd, like I do look at it from the other way where it's like I have no right to telling you what to think. And he kind of says that, but he takes it as an angle where it's like you have to almost lower expectations. It's up to us to like be very, very neutral and lower expectations so we're not all disappointed. And it's like you guys can think whatever you want, literally whatever you want. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to tell you what I think, and then you can agree or disagree. So if you, and I've said this before, if you want to be over the moon excited for this game, you have every right to. That's you. Now, you got to be aware if things go south and then maybe you'll be disappointed. You have to be aware of that. But that's not up for me. I have nothing to do with that. If you want to be a really big skeptic and say, hey, this game's looking awful, or it's kind of like a prove it situation, I have to wait till the game comes out, that's fine. I don't agree. I'm not with you. But that's fine, because who cares what I think? It's up to you. So I think he puts too much on the creator when it's like, yeah, I'm the one making the videos, I suppose, but I've always looked at it as I'm just a voice and you guys can hear me. I don't even think listening as in like following my instructions. No, I mean, we don't really hold as much power as I think people think we do. We really don't. You guys have the option to do whatever you want, and I've always kind of, as long as you respect me. And the same situation to Luke. Like, I respect the guy. This is not an attack. I don't hate him. I don't think he's a moron, right? Like, it's just me talking. That's literally it. If you want to say they're just words, they are just words. That's all this is. So, and I view the same thing with you guys. I'm just talking. If you don't want to believe me, if you don't want to listen to me, if you don't want to follow instructions, you want to do your own thing, good. You should do your own thing, and that's what the whole point of this is. So I'm not here to like boss you around either side. I'm not here to tell you that you can't think the game is going to be a disaster in the same way that I'm not here to tell you that you can't think the game is going to be the greatest game of all time. I don't agree. I don't think the game is going to be the greatest game of all time, but who am I to tell you what to think? That's not up to me, right? So that's how I've approached it, and I'm going to continue to. So I'll leave a link to his video in the description below if you guys want to watch it. Give him your thoughts respectfully and peacefully, just like everybody else, right? And if not, if you don't want to, who cares? Again, doesn't actually matter. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all on the next one.